Hello and welcome back to the Social Impact Track for Austin Startup Week. For those of you that are just joining us, I'm Janice Omedeki, CEO and founder of the Mentor Method, and your Social Impact Track advisor and MC. So this is our last session for the day, session 3. If you are just tuning in, you missed some incredible sessions previously where we discussed the Austin social impact landscape and the options available to you if you wanted to start a social impact venture. And then we were joined by leadership at Notley, where they discussed how they're able to iterate, develop, and grow so many sustainable and life-changing initiatives. And I'm really looking forward to session 3. So as many of you know, or I hope you know, tonight is the vice presidential debate. So what better time to discuss politics and civic participation than through this next panel? We are joined by Ashley Lopez, KUT reporter, Savannah L. Barker, Senior Director of Program Operations at Notley, Charlie Bonner, Communications Director at Move Texas, and Sarah Ortiz, Executive Director at Austin Tech Alliance. And today they'll be discussing the importance of voting down ballot, how to navigate a confusing media environment, and where to find useful information as you get ready to vote in the most critical election of our lifetime. Panelists, welcome and thank you so much.
Thank you, and thanks for such a great introduction. Thanks to Austin Startup Week for having us. I'm Charlie Bonner, the Communications Director at Move Texas, and so excited to be with all of y'all today in this incredible panel and for a great conversation on this wild and wonderful election we have going for ourselves. And with voting starting in just a couple of days here in Austin, there's no better time to have this conversation. I would love if we could start this by going around and introducing ourselves, our pronouns, and a little bit about your organization and what you think your role is in this election. I like to say that we all have a role to play, whether we work in politics or in the media or not. All of us have a role to play in this election, so I'd love to hear what yours is. Ashley, if we can start with you, my friend.
Yeah, I'm Ashley Lopez, she, her. I'm a political reporter. I also cover healthcare, small stuff over at KUT. And my role in this election is mostly just to watch it, report on it. I see myself as because we're a public radio station, providing just really useful information to voters, especially at a time like this where things are really confusing, is what I see as my main role. Just arming people with enough information to feel capable and empowered to be citizens in this this state. Anyways, so that's the gist of what I do.
Yeah, and one of the most important roles. So don't mitigate that. Savannah, over to you. If you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Savannah Barker, she, hers. I work at Notley, which is a social impact organization here in town that kind of sits at the intersection between for-profit and nonprofit work. And we do work kind of in the civic engagement space. We do work for women entrepreneurship. We have a number of different initiatives kind of doing different work throughout the community. And then I also recently joined the board of directors for GoodPolitics, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization local to Austin, started in Austin as sort of a series of parties to bring new people into the political process. And now we're kind of focused on equipping folks with the resources and the knowledge that they need to go into this this upcoming election feeling good about their decision.
Awesome. And Sarah, my friend, last but not least, over to you.
Hey everyone, I'm Sarah Ortiz-Shields. I run Austin Tech Alliance. Austin Tech Alliance is a nonpartisan nonprofit that advocates for civic engagement in Austin's tech sector. I'm also the co-founder of La Politica. It's a group of women that aim to educate women, Latinas, on the political process. And I see my role as, a people connector and connecting people with information about elections and voting. I get a ton of questions every day about how can I do this? How can I do this? And my job is to really just point them in a direction where they can learn more or answer questions if I can.
Yeah. Love it. Love it. And I think the last introduction is over to y'all in the audience. We want to hear from you. We can talk to ourselves about politics all the time, but want to make sure that you're getting something useful out of this. So if you have questions about voting, if you have questions about this election, make sure that you're dropping them, and I'll make sure to ask our wonderful panelists. Ashley, I want to start with you. If you can help us kind of set the scene from your perspective as a reporter covering this kind of wild moment in voting starting on Monday. And I will actually say voting has already started, as vote by mail ballots are already in people's inboxes. Voting is already underway in Texas. But what's the state of the race, and kind of what stuff are you watching for right now, Ashley?
Well, I always watch out for access issues. Texas has like kind of a weird past, I should say, like a pretty shameful past with, making sure that voting rights are uniformly applied to everyone, that everyone who wants to vote has access to vote. So that's the kind of stuff I always watch. And we're walking into like a really interesting situation with the pandemic, obviously, which is that like there's an added layer of, I guess, a barrier to people voting, especially if you're older and, compromised. There's already a lot of access issues that you had before, especially if you're disabled. And, thankfully in the state there is, for, a lot of Texans, like ballot by mail is an option. But, that's a very limited, the scope of that program is very limited in the state. There's a lot of things go into making that happen, and there's a lot of places where things could go wrong, especially if you're a new voter and you're not careful. So that kind of stuff I'm watching, just hearing from, I'm going to be like keeping an ear to the ground to see if like voters are facing any issues with that, because we are seeing an increase in ballot by mail usage. So that's going to be interesting. And then there's just like the making sure that people feel safe when they go to vote in person, which is going to be everyone's going to feel moderately unsafe because it's a pandemic. If you're surrounded by a bunch of people, like your instinct right now is to feel unsafe, and that's good. Like that's your mind telling you.
Hold on to that.
Yeah, that's a good reaction. Don't be around a crowd of people and think everything's fine, because it's not. And so I'm going to be watching out for that. Like I do think like things went okay during the primary runoff. Like there was increased voters, like increased voting, like turnout. And things seem to go pretty well, but this is going to be on a scale, like this presidential election, like turnout is expected to be at a scale that, probably will look something like 2016 or more. So I think that's kind of what we're walking into, is just like a weird, like people are going to be voting in different ways. People are going to be voting for the first time in high numbers. And there's just like a lot to kind of keep an eye on.
Yeah, truly so much. All the changes are so critical. And we always like to talk about voting as a party. Nobody's coming to a party that they weren't invited to. They don't know what's going on or who's going to be there, and like breaking down what it means, even especially now that everything is changing, is so important. And consider this your invitation to the party if you're watching with us right now. But Sarah, I want to throw it over to you, because your work focuses, I think, interestingly at this intersection of civic engagement in tech. And why do you think it's so important to foster that sense of civic engagement among Austin's tech community at this moment?
Yeah, well, so there's over 7,000 employers of tech in Austin. And so that equates to about 16% of Austin's population. That's over 170,000 people. So imagine if all of those 170,000 people actually showed up at the ballot and voted, what an impact they would have. Also, there was a survey that was put out by one of our civic tech partners in Seattle, and they found that 82% of people working in tech are registered to vote, and 52% of them vote in every election. So you could say that people that work in tech or involved in tech are highly civically engaged and are regular voters. So it's really important for people to be educated about what's on the ballot, and why they should show up, because they make up this huge group.
And is your engagement with the tech community, do you feel like it's any different than the conversations you're having in other spaces in Austin? I think you're involved in a lot of political spaces. Do you see the conversations you're having as unique, or the questions you're getting, or anything like that?
Well, I think I see more frustration because people in this industry are frustrated. Why don't we have online registration?
Let's talk about that, Sarah. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, that's the number one thing I hear is, why can't we do things online? If I can take the census online, if I can do other things online, why can't I register to vote online? Why can't I vote online? And they don't understand, because there's security measures online that exist. Why can't this happen?
And the answer is voter suppression is why that happens. It is a very intentional thing that we do not have online voter registration in this state like 41 other states do. But ask your questions in the comments about that if you want my rant about online voter registration, because I've got it ready. But Savannah, I want to pass it over to you for a little bit about Notley, because I think, like Sarah, really sitting in an interesting space in civic engagement, not the kind of traditional nonprofit work that we see, but really taking the work of tech and entrepreneurship and those values into the civic engagement space in a very interesting way to me. How is that affecting your perspective going into this election and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think I have this unique background where I've worked on political campaigns, and then I've worked in the startup space, and now I'm working in this sort of intersection between nonprofit and for-profit. And I think the things that the through line between those three different sort of spaces is that there's always this sort of hustle and scrappiness and like not enough resources and not enough money and not enough people that engenders this kind of excitement and sort of innovative way of approaching that work. Like all of that work has been very entrepreneurial. And I think that's fundamental to kind of our approach at Notley, where, we have different initiatives. One of our newer ones, Homefront Fund, which is focused on affordability, homelessness, and food insecurity, where we are kind of taking this sort of for-profit startup approach and applying it to kind of traditionally either stuff in the public sector or the nonprofit sector. And so I think with the election, similarly, we have some investments that are kind of explicitly in the sort of civic engagement space. Civic is one of our biggest ones. But then we're also kind of tackling a lot of these like local community issues from these different kind of perspectives of like, how can we find this intersection between for-profit and nonprofit to try to solve some of our community problems. So it's definitely an interesting way of thinking about the election and, how to kind of, again, bring folks into the fold who maybe aren't traditionally super, in the know about what's going on in politics, especially local politics, even though that, as we all on this call know, has a much larger impact on our day-to-day life. So that's kind of how all those things work together. And that's definitely impacted my approach both at Notley and I would say through GoodPolitics, which is kind of a similar, our founders at GoodPolitics also have that kind of tech startup background. And it's really about bringing in new people into the political process.
Yeah. And I think you lead right into my kind of next thought about local elections and how critical they are. If anybody's following the president, if you watch the last presidential debate, you're ready to tune out this presidential race, right? Like I get paid to follow this for a living, and I was like, I don't know about all this. So if you're a Move works specifically with young voters, many first-time voters, I think if you turned on that debate for a single minute, you're like, this politics thing is not for me, right? And so we have to fight that. And I think that down-ballot races are where I'm seeing young people really get plugged into the race. So I'm interested, kind of question for all of y'all, what kind of stuff are you following on the ballot this year that's not the presidential election? Sarah, if we can start with you.
I mean, I'm really paying attention to the railroad commissioner role. For those of you who don't know what a railroad commissioner does, they regulate the oil and gas industry here in Texas. It doesn't have anything to do with railroads. It's a very important role given that's such a huge industry in Texas. Another thing that people don't often understand or don't understand is judgeships. So judgeships have a term of, I'm going to say 6 years here in Travis County, the ones that you would be voting on. And that's a long time. 6 years is a long time, and that is a lot of decisions. So I would encourage everybody to just really understand what judges you're voting for and the impact they make on your community. Yeah.
I, like everyone, was shocked to find out the Railroad Commission had nothing to do with trains. What is that about? Savannah, what are you watching? What are you looking at on the ballot this super long ballot this year?
Yes. Yeah. Well, the first thing I would actually hit on to Sarah's point about the railroad commissioner is Sarah with Politica, KUT, and GoodPolitics put together this awesome tool that's a list of essentially job descriptions for each elected office. And the idea is, again, like a railroad commissioner, where you go like, okay, what am I actually voting for? What is this person doing? And it kind of, fundamentally, when we're electing folks to have these roles, like they're interviewing for a job, and like, what is that job description? So we have in both English and Spanish on the GoodPolitics website, as well as a few other places where you can actually access this description of each of these elected offices, with an emphasis on, again, those sort of down ballot, the judgeships, the different sort of county commissioner, all that kind of good stuff. So I would just encourage folks to check that out. And then, I'm just really interested in some of these kind of more competitive, even just congressional races. I think where, we have real potential to kind of flip some districts. So that's something I've been watching, and I know giving some money to here and there. But yeah.
Awesome. Ashley, what about you? What are we watching right now? Down ballot.
Well, I'm very, very interested in what's going to happen to the Texas House. I think there's a lot of money pouring in that people haven't noticed, that it's going directly to Texas House races, and they're coming from all over the country, because this could be a big potential change in Texas politics. Like, having divided government would be like a big change, because the Republican parties have a lock on pretty much every branch of government for decades now. So that's interesting. But also, so much is decided in the legislature, like that I cover, like healthcare, and what's been like the state's refusal to expand Medicaid, stuff like that. That's all kind of rooted in what the legislature's priorities. I'm an Austin reporter, so like I have to care about the Capitol, but I think everyone should too. People kind of just see that, like senator and congressman, like, if they get that, like that seems to be like the names that they know. But I'm hopeful for a day when people know who their state house rep is and state senator, because, a lot of big decisions are made, every other year there. Just in case you don't know, we don't meet, like the legislature doesn't meet every year. It's every other year. So
very unique. We're one of 2 or 3 states that do that.
Yeah. And and when I talk to other political reporters and who like cover their state houses, and they're always shocked by this, because it's like, Texas is so big. Like, how can you adequately address the needs of a state once every other year? And my answer is always, you can't. And we don't.
Yeah.
So anyways, and stuff like that, I think a lot of people don't pay attention to what the state legislature does, because they do so little, it seems. And it's like, well, that's, it's a vicious cycle. So I always think it's really really important to focus on what the leg is doing, because they have a lot of power and they could change a lot of things. Things like online voter registration. That is rooted to the fact, I once went on a deep dive and looked at every single like committee meeting they had on a bill. It's only like happened twice that they actually took up
got to that committee.
Yeah. Got a hearing on online voter registration. And it's really interesting to see, like, the people who are talking against it, what their pitch is. And their pitch is, well, if we allow people to register to vote online, this will become a democratic state. So it's sometimes even as like clear as that. It's kind of interesting. But that all happens in the ledge, and we should all pay attention to the ledge more.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I'm like a ledge evangelist. One, because I think you're absolutely right. Those issues that are so important to us, like our actual day-to-day lives, are really decided at the legislature. And also, they're the most accessible people, right? These people really live in your neighborhood, right? There are a ton of them, and they live around here, and they are much easier to access. And that building, that pretty pink building in Austin, is a public space, and everyone has a right to go down there and like give those people your 2 cents, which more people should do. So, and basically, reality show. It's the best reality show on TV, the Texas legislature. So like, get invested to it. There's a cast of characters. It's basically the amount of wine they drink is like Real Housewives level. 10 out of 10 would recommend. But I want to dive in a little bit more to like how we're understanding what's on the ballot. One of the things that I hear from young voters all the time is that they don't know enough. I don't know enough to vote. Why would I get involved if I don't know enough? Which to me speaks to a problem of like, we've told people that there's some like invisible barrier of how much you need to know to like speak out, which I think is false. I think everyone can bring their lived experiences to the ballot box, and that's the most important thing. But Savannah, how are we getting a better understanding of what folks on the ballot actually do? I think if you want to talk about the job descriptions a little more, but how are you navigating who these people are and what they actually do?
Yeah, no, and I mean, that really speaks to, again, the kind of core mission of Good Politics is that I think, those of us who are kind of entrenched in the political universe, I think that there can be a feeling from sort of the outside that there's some kind of intellectual area that you have to rise to, that you have to have, all of these names memorized and all of these offices memorized, when even those of us, frankly, who oftentimes are very entrenched, I still, again, the railroad commissioner thing, like that was news to me. I was like, wait, what? So I think that there's, a perception of almost like intellectual bullying of like, you have to know everything to be able to participate, which of course I think is not true at all. I think that if anything, I think bringing a fresh perspective to, okay, again, who are these people at the local level? You can learn about the people that you're voting for and just learn a little bit about their background and kind of like, okay, this is kind of where I want to make my decision. But we're kind of trying to make it kind of an easier, almost like a checklist of kind of like, okay, here's kind of core places where you can find the key information that you need, and then leaving it up to the voter, and trying to, again, kind of tear down any barriers of entry of I need to know everything before I step into that ballot box, because I don't think that that's true. And I think that we can kind of give them the high level, again, here's kind of what's on the ballot and what you should be prepared to vote on. And it's okay if you don't know everything. Nobody knows everything.
Yeah. The people we're electing certainly don't, I'll tell you. Okay, that's our threshold. Sarah, same question to you. How are you helping folks get a better understanding of what's actually on the ballot and how we break it all down?
Yeah, well, as Savannah mentioned earlier, we did publish the job description guide, and in partnership with KUT and La Politica, we translated that into Spanish. So
Wonderful.
If you are a Spanish speaker and you have these same questions, which you should have, about what does a railroad commissioner do, what does a school board member do, then and you're more comfortable understanding in Spanish, you can go to our goodpolitics.com and .org and read these job descriptions, and they're in very plain language. So in there we have the definition, like the legal definition about what the role does, and then it really breaks it down. So this is what this person does, and this is how it's going to affect you. And people just need to take time. Even me, who I've voted in every single election since I turned 18. I have to take, maybe it takes 2 hours to go and educate myself about who I want to vote for, to go to their web pages, Facebook, to go to Vote 411. And it takes that time if you really want to prepare yourself and to educate yourself and be informed about who you want to vote for.
Yeah.
So put it in your schedule. Don't just show up.
Yeah. It's all about that pre-planning. We got to do that pre-planning. I'll do another plug for questions if you've got them. We've got these great experts here, so drop those questions. We want to answer them for you. But Ashley, you followed several of these election cycles over the last several years. And how is this election going to be different? We talked about access a little bit at the beginning, but the look and feel and the rules and everything feel like they're changing all the time. What's going on compared to other years?
Well, I mean, this is a uniquely interesting election for a lot of reasons. I'm going to start with the obvious one, which is like we're voting for a president. That obviously doesn't happen all the time. It happens only every 4 years. And we have a Senate race on our ballot as well. That doesn't happen every election either. The most interesting thing I think that voters probably hasn't been flagged for them yet is, and this is back to the Texas legislature, next year is a redistricting year. So who you put in office next year, that during this election they, take office next year, they will be deciding the political boundaries of the state for the next 10 years. This went way under the radar I remember 2010, Democrats in particular didn't pay close attention to local races that year, and, state legislatures. Republicans did a good job of messaging and bringing out their voters. And, that's why there was like an uptick in, Republican legislatures, like Republicans flipping state legislatures. And, it is legal in this country, the Supreme Court has said many times, to have partisan gerrymandering. So if you're a Republican or a Democrat, like your party keeping or taking power in the state legislature during a redistricting year should mean a lot to you. Because that is going to decide whether your party keeps power for 10 years. So I think not enough messaging is done. And, I would argue I haven't heard enough of that. Remember, everyone, legislatures meet next year because this is a census year. They're meeting next year to come up with political boundaries. So I know there are groups that are raising money on this issue. So anyways, that is something that I think raises the stakes of this election in a very big way, and in a way that is not often, is very complicated and not often given a lot of light. And then, there are differences in how we're voting as well. Straight ticket voting is going away. I don't think that's something that's been shouted by, off the rooftops either. Something like 68% of people in 2016 voted straight ticket. The highest usage of straight ticket voting, that's going away. So a lot of people who got used to voting a certain way in Texas aren't going to have that option. So that's something I'm looking out for.
Can you break down what that means just a little bit?
Right. So in Texas, if you're new to Texas, this is something you probably come into contact with because it's not very often used. But for a long time here, there was always the option on a ballot to choose either to go one by one through each race, or to just choose a party, and it would fill it out for you. It was mostly a time-saving measure for people, or just honestly just a way to it was really helpful for maybe those low information voters who haven't had the time to look at every city council race or look at every state house race. Basically allow voters to vote brand, which is what a lot of voters do anyways, if we're being honest. It is important to do your research, but not everyone has the time. And this was very useful for voters in that particular situation. And so now voters will have to go, race by race, make sure that they fill out all those down ballot races, all that, everything on that ballot. They'll just have to go one by one, which when this was being passed in the legislature was an argument made, which is we should be forcing voters, to look at every race and do their research, which I'm not going to weigh in on either way. But so I think does that clear enough?
Absolutely. And I think it's so important to break it down for folks, because I'm telling everyone, start at the bottom. Work your way up to president. Treat yourself by voting for president. Don't start there. You got to earn it, or start at the bottom and work your way up. But I think as well, and this really kind of leads into my next question for Sarah, it's really going to affect how we're making our plans to vote, because it's going to take a bit longer.
Oh, yeah.
They're estimating in places like Houston that it's going to take 15 to 20 minutes just to fill out the ballot, to get through all of those races, clicking them one by one, which shouldn't deter anyone, but it should be worked into your plan. So Sarah, how are you encouraging folks to make a plan to vote? What kind of things should we be thinking of when we're scheduling, marking it in our calendars and stuff?
Yeah, well, first, if you're working for an organization, I would ask them if they allow you to have time off to vote. Many organizations are allowing 2 hours paid time off for you to go and vote. So I would ask your HR department or your manager about that, first of all. Second of all, I would do your research before you head to the polls. Vote411.org is a great nonpartisan organization where you can look at your sample ballot based on your zip code, and then you need to write those down. You cannot take a phone into the ballot box. So some of these ballots are going to have 50, 60 candidates on them, and you need to write those down on a piece of paper and take that paper in with you and unfold it and then type that in. That's going to be really important. Also, when you're heading to the polls, don't wear your shirt, whoever for Congress, whoever for president. You can wear a vote shirt as long as it doesn't say who you're voting for.
Yeah.
Just stay away from political shirts. The election judge will ask you to leave or to remove your shirt. I'm not sure about that, but they
have asked people to turn them inside out before.
Yeah.
I have seen that, to wear a jacket. You can get general voting merch at shop.movetexas.org. Just saying. No candidates. Just
no candidates, nonpartisan. So just keep in mind when you're heading out to what you have, what you have on your shirt or on your mask or on your hat. Take your list. Mask up, wear appropriate clothing, do your research, take a friend, take your family, take your pod with you when you go to vote. And if you run into any problems, whether that's at the poll, whether it's outside of the poll, if you need to cast your ballots either in another language or in ASL, and you need help and they cannot help you there at the wherever you're casting your vote, you should all write down this number, 866-OUR-VOTE. That's the election protection hotline, and you can call them with problems and issues, and they will help you over the phone. And that phone number is available in, I think, several languages.
It is. It's definitely important, and I think one of the things, I thank you so much for all of those great points. The election protection one, definitely write it down, put it in your phone, because even if you don't need it, somebody else might, and we all have to be confident enough to push back on any problems that we see. I've been involved in this work a long time, registering voters and stuff since I was in middle and high school, and they tried to turn me away from the polling location last year, saying I wasn't on the rolls. And I was like, you must not know about me. I registered myself to vote and several thousand other people. But, I knew my rights enough to be able to push back and have that privilege to be able to push back and say, no, we're not doing this today. Absolutely not. And they were like, oops, found it. Here's your ballot. All of a sudden. And so we all have to have that confidence to push back and then ask help from the lawyers when we need it. I think that's really important, especially this year with so much going on and so much changing. Savannah, what is your advice, for folks that are just trying to make sense about all these changes, right? There's so much noise, so much going on. What I love about GoodPolitics is how it is making things so accessible to people. Just how are you breaking it down right now?
Yeah, I think everything that kind of Sarah said about making a plan, and we actually have kind of a little interactive checklist that you can check off, you've made your plan. The thing about writing down who you're voting for, I made that mistake when I first voted in Texas, where I pulled out my phone that had all of my notes in it, and someone went, "Oh no, you cannot do that." And I was like, "Oh shit," and totally had to kind of go off of. I remembered kind of most of the people. I think it was a special election, fortunately, but. I think making a plan to vote, I think anticipating, I'm really pushing, I know my friends and kind of through GoodPolitics people to early vote, because I just think it's easier. You can work it into your schedule. You can go to any polling location in your county. And so I've had really positive experiences early voting. And I think if you want to make that your plan, it also gives you a little bit of leeway just in case for whatever reason that, you go to a polling place and there's a huge line, you have the option to try at another polling place or try a different day. So that's the big thing I've been pushing people to do. And that way that you just give yourself that buffer time of just in case. You can always kind of fit it into your schedule. Yeah.
I think that's super smart. I'm always telling people, I'm like, go day 4 or 5 of early voting, pick a random day, in Austin, we're also lucky. The Travis County clerk will give you wait times that you can look up on their website. So when you're going out, if you're saying I have an hour, you can see who has the shortest wait time, which is a great survey we have here that they don't have a lot of places. We do have a question coming in that says elderly parents are concerned about that their ballot by mail won't count. We've heard a lot of rhetoric around this from the president and some other bad actors that are spreading kind of disingenuous information about vote by mail. Texas doesn't allow mail-in ballots to be trackable. How can I encourage my parents to use mail-in ballots? Ashley, can I start with you on that? Any advice there?
Yeah, from my understanding, it kind of depends on what county you live in. For example, like Travis County is putting up a lot of information, like mail-in ballot information online. It's on votetravis.org. So you can find if it's been received, if it's been processed, that kind of thing. That just means like the signature matched. And then
I believe Houston and Austin, I think you can.
Yeah, so like the bigger counties, which is good, because my other advice would be call. Like, put your ballot in the mail early, or hand deliver to the one location that the county's allowed to have for that, and then call. Give them a couple days, and then if you're nervous about it, call the office and ask if it's been processed and, if the signature was accepted. Otherwise, you'll, and then if it wasn't, like, you get to talk to them and, figure out next steps. Sometimes and if you are very, very nervous and you don't think like you'll have enough time to put it in the mail, or you changed your mind and you have your ballot, people always have the option to surrender their ballot when they vote in person. We get a lot of questions about this, like, people just scared last minute about voting by mail. I would say if you're voting early by mail, you are going to be fine. And if you have these hand delivery sites, and that's an option too, like, don't go in person if you are if you're like immunocompromised or older. Like, I would rethink that, just as because I also cover health, like from a public health perspective. Like, if you have like a really compromised immune system, it is better just to vote by mail. And if you do it early, it should be fine. And then follow up with phone calls if you live in a smaller county where like that's probably not going to overrun them. And it's also your right to know. That would be my advice. I don't know if Savannah and Sarah like other advice.
Agreed.
No, I think you absolutely nailed it. In that option to bring it in person and not throw it in the mail. Really important people know. Even if they've been reduced right now as of last week, every county can only have one drop-off. So if you're in one of these larger counties, you might have to drive a little bit to get over there, but still definitely an option. I went over to the Travis County one yesterday. Super quick and easy to drive through there, drop it off. Very safe and secure. But I think we also really need to push back against this negative rhetoric against ballot by mail when we hear it. Voting by mail and absentee ballot has been going on since the Civil War. Millions and millions of people have voted by mail, and it's a safe and secure way to host an election in a pandemic. So my last plug there, we got to fight back against that information. In kind of closing in our last few minutes here, my question for all of you, and I love talking to people about this, but why is it important to you to vote this year? If there are folks joining us today or who are part of the kind of Austin startup community that are considering sitting on the sidelines, what are you saying to them? What is your closing pitch these last few days before early voting? Sarah, can I start with you?
Yeah, so anybody that knows me knows how much I love to talk about local elections. And so it's sort of have a plea to people that local elections really do make a difference. Local elections can be won by a handful of votes. And so there are several city council races, county commissioner races on the ballot this year. If any of those go to runoff, I've seen people win those runoff races by 15, 20 votes. So if you're thinking that your vote isn't going to make a difference for your city council person, I'm telling you that it makes a big difference. So please go and vote. Voting starts next week on the 13th, which I'm sure you'll remind everybody.
Yes, we have an extra week of early voting. It's a little bit different this year. So yes, plug that date for sure. Savannah, your final pitch for voters. Why are you voting this year?
Well, my final pitch for voters, I think, we've talked a lot about local elections, which I think are really exciting, and there's a lot of reason to kind of vote there. I think also, honestly, I think Texas is just such an interesting place politically. I don't remember who the quote is from or where the quote is from, but it's like Texas is not a red state or blue state. It's a non-voting state. Like we don't actually know what the politics of Texas could look like if more people got involved. And so I'm really excited to see, with this election and with future elections and all of the incredible work being done by organizations in Texas, like Move Texas, to get more people into that political process. I really think it has the potential to actually change the look of the state politically in some really profound ways. So I think this election is kind of like we're right teetering on the edge, and I think we can continue. Again, we're going into redistricting and all of the information from the census, and I think that there's a lot of kind of big shifts that could happen with this election. So yeah,
I think you're totally right. We need our electorate to reflect the rich diversity and culture of the population of the state.
Yep.
And right now, it skews older, whiter, and straighter. So our elected officials skew older, whiter, and straighter, and then they don't represent me. Ashley, my friend, over to you. Why are you voting? Why is it important? What is your pitch to folks this year?
Well, I'll make it less personal because my job is really just to focus on like voters, like other people and why they should vote. Lest we forget, we are in the middle of a global pandemic. Texas in particular has not fared well. A lot of people have died. A lot of people are currently suffering the financial implications of all this. And so the state is going to be going through some hard times for the next, I'm going to say the next couple of years. These things don't just shake out. Damage like this is long lasting. And so, voting is the one way in which you can have a say in how that's going to go, what that journey out of this or through this is going to look like. And it shouldn't stop there. But voting is the first step. But I would say if you are like everyone else in this in this state, touched by this pandemic and either the financial or physical ramifications of that, this is a chance to have at least a say in how that's going to go. And that is like my sort of larger thing during all this is like the stakes are always really high, but the stakes are particularly high this year. Making your voice heard means at least your perspective is a part of what that journey looks like moving forward.
Yeah, I think you're so right. And such a great way to end this conversation. For me, I'll throw in my moderator privilege and give you my spiel too. To me, it is so much less about who's on the ballot than ourselves, right? To me, registering to vote and voting are one of the ways in which we take a little bit of control over our lives. And I think in this moment of like absolute chaos, voting is one of the only ways that we can control what's going on. We get a say over the future of our communities and the future of our education system and our economy and everything. Our one vote gets to have some power and some say in that. Win or lose, you have power in the direction that we're moving forward. And everybody that can vote should vote just to have that sense of empowerment for yourselves, because once you're empowered like that, nobody can take that away. Regardless of what happens, regardless of policy put in place, nobody can take away that sense of empowerment for yourself. I want to thank all of my panelists for being on here today. I'm like, as we all kind of like our internet cuts out in these final moments. Thank you guys so much for your expertise. Thank you to GoodPolitics for throwing us all together in this conversation into Austin Startup Week. Make sure you're following all these folks on the interwebs and their organizations and turning to them. One of the other great things that we can do in this time is be trusted sources of information for our friends and our neighbors. So follow KUT, GoodPolitics, La Politica, Move Texas, share our stuff so your friends and neighbors know when the deadlines are and what they need to do to get involved and be a voter. That's one of the most important things that we can do in this moment. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you.
Brilliant way to wrap up the social impact track. Charlie, like I said in the chat, you're my hero. Savannah, Sarah, Ashley, Sarah, thank you all so much for sharing your insights and your expertise. Man, so a couple of things that I heard just to wrap up session 3. First and foremost, this is not an election to sit on the sidelines. Every vote counts, and it's time to really get out there and vote both nationally and locally. As Sarah mentioned, a local election can be won by a handful of votes, and an election can be won by even 15 to 20 votes. So it's important to get out there and make your voices known and think about the broader impact on your community and not just the national election. Also look into roles that are voted, including judgeships and railroad commissioners, and have the confidence to push back. Make sure that you're still learning and that you come prepared for voting, for your voting experience this year. That can include not bringing your phone and not wearing anything with a political affiliation. So maybe stock up on those Move Texas t-shirts or a Notley t-shirt or a KUT, whatever it is. Just something that doesn't clearly show a political affiliation is the best way to go. For additional information, visit www.ourgoodpolitics.org, movetexas.org, or call 866-OUR-VOTE for more information. Well, we are sadly at the end of the social impact track for Austin Startup Week. I've enjoyed spending the afternoon with you. I hope you did as well. We covered quite a lot, from the startup scene to being civically active in our community. So I hope you're walking away and into the startup scene feeling empowered on your social impact journey. I'm Janice Omedeki. Thanks for spending the day with me, and I'll talk to you soon.